The morning of August 25, 1944, found German technical officers at Flak Regiment 155W hunched over their calculations in growing disbelief. The observation post at Pas-de-Calais, France crackled with urgent radio traffic as field reports came streaming in. The numbers on their desks seemed impossible, defying every principle they'd learned at Luftwaffe academies across the Reich. 82% destroyed, not damaged, not scattered, completely destroyed. Through their field telescopes, German observers had watched something that contradicted everything their intelligence services had assured them about Allied anti-aircraft capabilities. The V1 flying bombs that had launched toward London in pre-dawn hours weren't falling to fighter attacks or becoming tangled in barrage balloon cables. Instead, they were being torn from the sky by anti-aircraft fire over the coastal gunbelt, shells exploding with an accuracy that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Direct hits were nearly impossible at those speeds, yet somehow the missiles were detonating anyway, surrounded by bursts that shouldn't have connected. At headquarters in the Château d'Artois, Oberst Max Wachtel received these reports with mounting dread. The entire V1 offensive had been his responsibility. He knew the technical limitations better than anyone. Over the summer campaign, he'd watched the destruction rates climb in ways that made no sense. Back in June, coastal guns had claimed only 17% of the flying bombs. By early July, the rate had climbed to 24%. Now, in late August, they were losing more than 4 out of every 5 missiles to anti-aircraft fire. Something fundamental had changed, something Wachtel couldn't explain. What neither Wachtel nor any German scientist understood was that they were witnessing the deployment of one of World War II's most closely guarded secrets. The technology was protected at levels matching the atomic bomb project itself. The proximity fuse, or VT variable time fuse as the Allies designated it, was systematically destroying Hitler's terror weapon with a precision that German physics insisted shouldn't exist. It was a secret so perfectly kept that not a single intact example would fall into German hands during the entire campaign. The story had begun 10 weeks earlier, on June 13, 1944, exactly 1 week after D-Day. In response to the Allied invasion, Hitler had unleashed his long-promised vengeance weapon against London. At 4:25 in the morning, the first V1 descended on Grove Road in Bow, destroying a railway bridge and crushing nearby homes. 6 people died instantly, 30 more were injured. 200 were left homeless. The weapon represented years of German engineering. It was a pilotless aircraft, powered by an Argus 109014 pulse jet engine, carrying 850 kilograms of amatol explosive at 640 kilometers per hour. It was the world's first operational cruise missile, and German High Command believed it would bring Britain to its knees. Major Walter Dornberger, head of the V-weapons program at Peenemünde, had calculated that even with conservative estimates, a 25% success rate would deliver more explosive power to London than the entire Blitz of 1940 and 1941 combined. Each V1 cost approximately 5,000 Reichsmarks to produce, a fraction of what a manned bomber mission would cost, with no risk to German pilots. At Peenemünde Army Research Center, German scientists had every reason for confidence. They had developed advanced rocket technology. They had created operational jet aircraft. Now they fielded the world's first cruise missile. Dr. Robert Lusser, who designed the V1's control system, calculated that interception would be nearly impossible. The flying bomb traveled at 640 kilometers per hour, while maintaining varying altitudes between 600 and 2,700 meters. British fighters needed speeds exceeding 650 kilometers per hour just to catch it. To actually destroy it, they had to close within 200 meters, which meant risking destruction from the explosion itself. As for anti-aircraft fire, the mathematics were equally daunting. The probability of a direct hit on such a small, fast target was calculated at less than 1 in 10,000 shells fired. This wasn't propaganda, it was sound ballistic science. Conventional time-fused shells required accurate prediction, precise calculation, manual fuse setting, and perfect timing. With the V1 moving at those speeds, gunners had perhaps 30 seconds from initial detection to engagement. That time frame seemed impossibly tight for conventional weapons. Oberst knew these limitations from both sides of anti-aircraft warfare. During the entire campaign, German forces would launch 9,521 V1 missiles from ground sites against England alone, with thousands more deployed against other targets, bringing the total to approximately 25,000 throughout the war. Within days of the first launches, troubling reports began reaching German intelligence. British anti-aircraft defences were adapting with suspicious speed and effectiveness. By late June, the interception rate had climbed from the predicted 10% to 24%. It was higher than expected, but German analysts could rationalize it. They attributed it to improved British radar and better gun positioning. Then July arrived, and the statistics became genuinely inexplicable. German technical officers monitoring the campaign noticed something deeply disturbing. British guns were claiming V1 kills with impossibly low ammunition expenditure. Observers stationed on the French coast witnessed the phenomenon directly. V1s would fly steadily toward England across the Channel. Then, as they crossed the coastal zone, they'd suddenly be surrounded by flak bursts. Seconds later, they'd tumble from the sky. The peculiar thing was that the explosions seemed to occur too far away for direct hits. Yet the missiles fell anyway, their fuselages torn apart by fragments that couldn't have reached them if the conventional mathematics held true. Unknown to German intelligence, they were witnessing proximity fuses in action. The technology had been operational in the Pacific since January 1943, when the USS Helena had shot down a Japanese dive bomber with shells that exploded when proximity sensors detected a nearby target. The principle was revolutionary. Rather than requiring a direct impact or relying on preset timing, the fuse contained a miniature radio transmitter. When reflections indicated proximity to a large object, circuits triggered the detonator. The German intelligence failure was comprehensive and nearly total. The Oslo report from November 1939 had mentioned proximity fuse research, but German scientists had dismissed it as disinformation. Germany itself had pursued proximity fuse development. German engineers had researched over 30 different designs, exploring every conceivable approach. None had achieved operational status. The technical challenges seemed insurmountable: miniaturizing radio transmitter receivers for artillery shells, making vacuum tubes survive 20,000 G-forces during firing and the 25,000 revolutions per minute spin imparted by rifled barrels, creating batteries that could remain dormant for years yet activate instantly when needed, achieving mass production of devices so delicate and complex. German engineers had concluded that proximity fuses were simply impossible. The engineering obstacles appeared insurmountable. Yet by August 1944, American factories were producing 40,000 VT fuses daily. During that final week of August 1944, the proximity fuse achieved its maximum effectiveness. The British had fundamentally reorganized their entire anti-aircraft defense system. Guns were now equipped with American SCR-584 radar for automatic tracking. More crucially, they fired shells equipped with VT fuses specifically modified for the V1 threat. The Royal Artillery and RAF Regiment had been redeployed from their original positions in the North Downs to the south coast, creating a concentrated gun belt that stretched along England's vulnerable shore. This coastal positioning served multiple purposes. Any shells that failed to detonate would fall harmlessly into the sea, rather than landing on British territory. This eliminated any chance that German forces could recover unexploded fuses and reverse engineer the technology. Naval vessels patrolled the Channel, preventing any German salvage operations. The positioning was brilliant and thorough. As V1s crossed the English coast, they entered a kill zone where technology had trumped statistics. The SCR-584 radar would automatically lock onto targets, calculate trajectories, and feed firing solutions to the guns. The proximity fuse contained miniature radio transmitters built with vacuum tubes developed by Sylvania Electric and Western Electric. When reflected signals indicated proximity, thermionic switches triggered detonators, sending steel fragments tearing through V1 hulls at supersonic speeds. On that extraordinary day in late August, coastal guns destroyed 82% of incoming V1s. It was a rate German engineers deemed physically impossible based on their understanding of ballistics and weapons physics. Reports of such interception rates created crisis meetings at German headquarters. Wachtel suspected sabotage. Perhaps there were defects in the missiles themselves, or perhaps someone on the German side was deliberately providing false information. Emergency inspections found nothing wrong with the missiles. Test firings over German territory showed normal performance. Every missile functioned exactly as designed. The problem manifested only when the V1s encountered British defences. This fact alone was deeply troubling. German experts concluded the British had developed some kind of revolutionary anti-aircraft system, but they couldn't determine specifics without capturing examples. Wachtel tried varying tactics, different altitudes, larger salvos, night launches when radar might be less effective, weather exploitation during conditions that might interfere with British detection. Nothing worked. The kill rate remained devastatingly high, week after week, day after day. At Peenemünde, scientists faced an uncomfortable conclusion. If the Allies had developed proximity fuses, they had achieved what Germany thought impossible. The very fact that Allied guns were destroying flying bombs at such rates meant the Allies had solved problems German physics said couldn't be solved. German efforts to uncover the secret intensified, but they failed completely. The proximity fuse's security was nearly perfect. Production was compartmentalized across 110 separate factories. Individual workers knew only their specific assigned tasks. They had no knowledge of how their components fit into the larger system. Even the name variable time was deliberately misleading, suggesting conventional time delay fuses rather than proximity sensors. The name concealed the truth from anyone who might hear it. By 1944, American electronics industry capacity had been devoted almost entirely to fuse production. By war's end, 22 million proximity fuses would be manufactured, representing an investment exceeding $1 billion in 1940s currency. The Crosley Corporation alone produced over 5 million fuses, nearly a quarter of the total American production. The numbers revealed a staggering industrial mismatch between the two powers. While Germany struggled to produce V1s using forced labor from concentration camps, America had transformed its entire electronics industry for fuse production. Peak daily production reached 40,000 units. Manufacturing costs had plummeted from $732 per unit in 1942 to just $18 by 1945. The Crosley Corporation, which had manufactured radios and refrigerators before the war, employed 10,000 workers, producing 16,000 fuses daily at peak capacity. Sylvania Electric dedicated its entire vacuum tube research division to developing ruggedized components capable of surviving the extreme conditions inside an artillery shell. The company produced 400,000 miniaturized tubes daily, accounting for 95% of all tubes used in proximity fuses. The contrast between the two nations was absolute. Germany handcrafted weapons in limited numbers, each one a masterpiece of precision engineering. America mass-produced revolutionary technology at a scale and speed Germany couldn't comprehend. Monthly American proximity fuse production exceeded total German V1 production for the entire war. The proximity fuse represented engineering of extraordinary sophistication. The device had to survive being fired from a gun barrel, enduring 20,000 G acceleration and 25,000 revolutions per minute spin. It had to function across extreme temperature ranges. Sylvania developed miniature vacuum tubes based on hearing aid designs, but reinforced far beyond their original specifications to survive these brutal forces. Batteries remained dormant for years of storage, yet they activated instantly when needed. Inside the fuse was a miniature radio that transmitted signals continuously. When reflections from a large object indicated proximity, circuits triggered detonation. This seemingly simple concept required solving problems German engineers had deemed impossible. Quality control was unprecedented in scope. Every single fuse underwent multiple tests. Random samples were actually fired in test guns to verify they would function correctly. Rejection rates remained below 2%, demonstrating remarkable manufacturing precision at massive scale. By September 1944, the V1 offensive was effectively neutralized. Of 9,521 V1s launched from ground sites against Britain, only 2,515 reached London. These missiles killed 6,184 civilians and injured 17,981. While tragic, these casualties represented a fraction of what German planners had intended. General Frederick Pyle, commanding Anti-Aircraft Command, calculated that without proximity fuses, V1 casualties would have been 4 to 5 times higher. The proximity fuse had saved London from devastation. Germany shifted to night launches and accelerated development of the V2 rocket, which flew so fast it couldn't be intercepted. But these desperate measures couldn't achieve the strategic impact German leaders had promised. The V1 became a costly failure, consuming resources desperately needed elsewhere. Bombers that could have been converted to fighters, workers that could have manufactured anti-tank weapons, factories that could have produced aircraft parts. The German failure to detect proximity fuses represented one of history's greatest intelligence disasters. Despite extensive intelligence networks and genuine technical expertise, Germans never grasped what they faced. The program remained completely secret throughout the war. Not a single intact proximity fuse fell into German hands during the entire V1 campaign. Remarkably, during the Battle of the Bulge, German forces captured an American ammunition dump containing proximity fuses but never recognized them for what they were. Their assumption that such devices were impossible blinded them to evidence literally in their own hands. After Germany's surrender, Allied interrogations revealed complete German ignorance about proximity fuses. Oberst Wachtel told officers that Germans had suspected improved radar or faster conventional fuses, but they'd never imagined self-detonating shells that could think for themselves. German scientists shown captured American VT fuses expressed genuine disbelief at what they were seeing. They couldn't comprehend how vacuum tubes could survive the acceleration, how batteries could remain viable for years, how circuits could function normally after surviving the violent firing process. They estimated being perhaps 10 years behind American technology. Dr. Merle Tuve, who led proximity fuse development at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, later reflected that success had come from systematic collaboration between scientists, engineers, and production workers. This type of coordination was something totalitarian systems couldn't achieve. The proximity fuse demonstrated that World War II's outcome was determined in laboratories and factories as much as on battlefields. While Germany pursued exotic wonder weapons, America focused on multiplicative technologies that enhanced existing weapons. The proximity fuses made every anti-aircraft gun 5 to 10 times more effective. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal stated that the proximity fuse had helped blaze the trail to Japan. Without the protection this ingenious device gave to surface ships of the fleet, America's westward push couldn't have been so swift, and the cost in men and ships would have been immeasurably greater. The V1 program had relied heavily on slave labor. Tens of thousands of concentration camp prisoners died in underground factories manufacturing V1s at places like Mittelwerk. Meanwhile, American workers voluntarily worked overtime for premium wages, most not knowing exactly what they produced, but understanding its importance to the war effort. At Sylvania's Ipswich facility, over 5,000 women worked 12-hour shifts, producing specialized components. They discovered only after the war that they had helped save London from Hitler's terror weapons. The proximity fuse secret held completely. British anti-aircraft crews didn't know what made their shells so effective. They had special ammunition with strict accounting requirements. Every proximity fuse shell fired at V1s was tracked meticulously. Unexploded shells were immediately secured. This secrecy cost lives. Allied ground forces couldn't use proximity-fused artillery until December 1944. Thousands of soldiers died because the technology was deemed too secret to risk in ground combat. Yet using it against V1s was justified because London's survival during the invasion was considered crucial. For Germany, the V1 program drained critical resources while achieving minimal strategic impact. Launching approximately 25,000 V1s cost millions of Reichsmarks and diverted resources from fighter aircraft and anti-tank weapons desperately needed on shrinking fronts. The program's reliance on slave labor added a moral dimension to its failure. The proximity fuse was defeating weapons built through human suffering, a contrast fully understood only after the war ended. The proximity fuse represented warfare's transformation. Victory would come through engineering and production rather than individual weapon superiority. It proved that modern warfare was a contest of industrial systems, not just military forces. Before saving Pacific Fleet ships and enabling Japan's defeat, the proximity fuse had saved London. Germans watching V1s fall from the sky never understood why. The technology that defeated them was inconceivable within their scientific framework. The transformation was dramatic. Before proximity fuses, destroying a single V1 required an average of 2,500 heavy anti-aircraft shells. With proximity fuses, this number dropped to 100 shells. The gun belt's interception rate rose from 17% to 82% in just 10 weeks. This wasn't achieved through courage or training, but through mass production of advanced technology on a scale Germany couldn't match or even comprehend. America had mobilized its entire electronics industry. Over 80,000 workers had been employed in fuse production alone. Investment had exceeded $1 billion. The proximity fuse was declassified in September 1945. The War Department announcement began by calling it one of the most important weapons developed during the war, surpassed in effectiveness only by the atomic bomb. For German scientists who had puzzled over V1 failures, the revelation brought understanding and humiliation. They had been defeated not by strategy or courage, but by industrial capacity they hadn't imagined possible. Post-war interviews revealed German shock. They had believed their V1 represented the pinnacle of weapons technology. Learning it had been defeated by mass-produced electronics, costing less than $20 each, was devastating. They had lost not to warriors, but to assembly lines. The proximity fuse technology evolved into modern air defense systems, radar altimeters, and electronic warfare capabilities. For Germany's former weapons scientists, it remained a permanent reminder of their wartime blindness. The proximity fuse proved that in modern warfare, mass-producing good technology matters more than crafting perfect weapons. Germany produced brilliant individual weapons. America produced effective weapons by the millions. On that remarkable day in late August 1944, when proximity fuses destroyed 82% of German V1s, the nature of warfare changed forever. The Germans launching their vengeance weapons never knew what invisible technology was defeating them. They had done everything right by their own understanding. They'd developed advanced weapons. They'd trained elite crews. They'd achieved genuine breakthroughs. Yet they were defeated by mass-produced electronics they couldn't imagine. The proximity fuse saved London through thousands of small explosions, each guided by technology German science deemed impossible. It was industrial democracy's triumph over totalitarian engineering, mass production over crafted perfection, multiplied simple solutions over complex wonder weapons. The Germans never discovered what hit their V1s as they fell burning from the sky, defeated by a secret they couldn't conceive and an industrial might they couldn't match. The proximity fuse had turned Hitler's vengeance weapon into London's salvation, and the Germans never understood how or why until long after it mattered. In the end, America's greatest victory wasn't on battlefields, but in factories where millions of workers, many of them women who didn't know what they were making, produced the tiny electronic devices that saved a city and transformed warfare forever. The 82% interception rate achieved in late August 1944 stood as proof that in modern war, industrial capacity could defeat any wonder weapon, no matter how ingenious. The proximity fuse was more than just a weapon. It was evidence that democracy's ability to mobilize science and industry could overcome tyranny's forced brilliance. The Germans, watching their perfect weapons fall from the sky, never knew why they had already lost a war their leaders insisted they were winning.